Welcome to Local Everywhere. My guest today is Susan Jeffs, and Susan is a poetry buff. She's written a book on poetry, she's done poetry, and she's going to talk a little bit about her poetry. So, Susan, how did you get started with poetry?
Well, that's one of my favorite questions because it goes way back. I have not been a poet all my life, or it has not always been part of my life. But when I was probably about 8 years old, I just started writing it. And I remember being really influenced by, I was reading Robert Louis Stevenson's A Child's Garden of Verses. And I had little 45s that went with that, I think. And I had other little 45s like Froggy One and Corton. And I would just have this little world in my room where I remember being very influenced by the rhythms and rhymes. And one day I just started writing. I remember being especially entranced by A Child's Garden of Verses, and
Mhm.
which is a beautiful book. Um, and I've heard a lot of people say that as well. And I just kind of started writing my own poems, and my dad realized what I was doing, and he thought that was just amazing and wonderful. And he was not a poet; he was a reader, but he really valued creativity and was a photographer himself, among other things. So once he saw that I had a spark of that, he just really encouraged it and still instilled in me the message that this is something meaningful and valuable and I should keep doing it, which is not always the message you get in our culture. And then I got away from it. I mean, I always enjoyed writing, but in school, we didn't have a lot of opportunities for really creative writing. In high school, a few, and in college, excuse me, I took a lot of some English classes, but a lot of psychology too. So I didn't even major in English. And then I, just kind of floated in and out of it for many years until I was in my mid 30s. And it was really a health crisis that brought me back to it in a very in depth way. And I learned about poetry as an expressive arts, started studying that, and it just kind of took off from there.
So, what inspires you to write a poem? Is it something you see on the news? Is it um as somebody that you know, or what inspires you to write your poetry?
Can be almost anything. There is, as you probably know, just a lot of nature imagery, a lot of rocks and rivers and mountains, although the poems are about many different things. But I've, growing up in Lake George, going to school in Vermont, the Adirondacks, in Vermont, my backyards, I have always been immersed in nature. And my father always had a tree farm, or a forest, which is actually where I'm living now in my own house. So I was hugely influenced by him and by our growing up. But as far as what sparks a poem, it's a little mysterious. Sometimes it is. I have occasionally been motivated by something in the news, but now it's just like every day there's something absurd. So it was innovative at first and no longer really. So I've gone back to things that are more, I think, enduring, um, which are poems of place, nature and spirit. But at the same time, they could be about an event or a relationship, and sometimes they do have sort of a bit of a societal backdrop in them. Um, but often it's just being outside that inspires it. And another thing that happens a lot in, I think, for artists in general and shows up in a lot of mine are these little pauses, are moments of stillness and emptying, which is when something new can come through. And sometimes that new thing is a poem, or sometimes it's like realizing, oh, I hate my job and I think I need to leave it, or something like that. But it's often between rushing around and you're like, I'm finally still, and you're just looking out at some type of scene that you have epiphanies or insights, and sometimes they're pretty powerful, and I like to call them pauses, or even bardos, when they're especially meaningful.
You use the word epiphany. If you're going through your day and you see something that, oh my God, I've got to write about this. Do you have pencil and paper and get it out and start creating something right then and there, or do you wait till you get home?
I start right then and there. Yeah, I almost always have a little pad of paper with me. Or if I don't, I'll speak it into my phone. Because they do often come very quickly and unexpectedly. I think prose writers can maybe sit down and kind of plan something out, but poetry isn't planned. One of the best pieces of advice, or wisest, that I have had from a poetry teacher was to get out of the way, to get your thinking mind out of the way, and to what you think the poem is going to be about is often not what it's going to be about, and to follow that pen, which is important for me, pen to paper, and to just follow that feeling or that intuition. And that's often they make the stronger poems, more interesting poems. And it's a continual lesson of just getting your mind out of the way, and opening up to possibility.
So
And
when
it's
you
a lot more.
get an inspiration to do a poem, do you like grab your pencil and paper and start writing? And as you're writing, does it evolve? Is like your thought process at the beginning evolve where it's totally different towards the end of the poem?
Yeah, and those are often the best ones. You're starting out thinking that you're writing about this, egret. I remember seeing an aging egret in a marsh recently, and he just looked like he was in his last days, and thinking I'm going to write about that, but then it could end up writing about your grandmother, or you really don't know. And poetry is very associative. And a lot of artists, writers' minds are very associative, so they're not sequential. They kind of go all over the place. And there's even a kind of poetry called leaping poetry. Robert Bly was big on leaping poetry, which can make quantum leaps and really fun stuff, and end up in a totally different place. So I think some of my favorite poems are ones that I remember reading one by I think it was Charles, one of the Wrights, James Wright, maybe. I'm not sure, where it starts in a plaza in Italy and ends up in his backyard in New Jersey. And it's just a beautiful poem. So those are a lot of my favorite ones. But at the same time, a poem that just is about one particular place. I think of Seamus Heaney, getting out of the car at County Clare on a windswept day and just being totally taken in by the strike of swans against the Black Sea, and just this moment. And it's just gorgeous. He doesn't go anywhere, but yet he does in the imagination. So I bet he had no plan for that poem. I think it's called Postscript. And just, poetry can be so many different things, but it's definitely not, it can be, rational sequential thinking, but I think it's better when it's, much far beyond the rational mind, where imagination is more of the key player.
What does poetry mean to you?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I don't think I've been asked that. Freedom. I don't freedom. Just kind of what's popping into my head. Freedom comes to mind. Play and imagination and exploration. Partly because you don't know where you're going to end up, and in teaching, you often learn things that you didn't know were going on in your unconscious or even in the world around you because you stopped to pay closer attention.
And
So it's been,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, it's been, I mean, really since I sort of gave my life over to it in my late 30s, and let it lead me instead of kind of running around all over the place, distracted by everything. It just became a huge teacher and gift. It created some of my closest friendships. It set me on a path of study, a path of leading workshops using poetry and nature as a way to explore our own lives and to the work I do. And, it's meant, really a path for me through life.
Is there since you live upstate, you live in the Adirondacks, is there a group of people, a club, an organization in which you all meet and get together and talk about your poetry and bounce ideas off one another? Do you have that?
No, but there are a few writers groups around that kind of scattered, and I think there's a more for prose and fiction writers that I've noticed. I'm near just a little north of Lake George, and Crandall Library has some things, and in Saratoga, and Saranac Lake has a lot, but that's 2 hours or hour and 40 minutes north. So I've been thinking about that, and there's not a lot for poets. So I've been actually thinking of maybe starting something. There are a couple open mics around Glens Falls and I do have a little group of poet friends or writer friends. And we do go to some of those and sometimes put things on ourselves, readings and whatnot. But I do think about how there's not a lot for poets and how we could use a little support group, which I might start with a friend, a little sort of poetry collective. Not necessarily a writing group, but more of a share resources and support and ideas, because I think that's needed.
I'm sorry. I love Lake George. Did you ever go to the women's retreat in Lake George?
Oh, Weowaka?
Yes.
Yeah, wonderful place. I spent some time there every summer. Um, Wonderful place. And I run some writing groups there, some summers or workshops. And yeah, it's great. You can just go and hang out and connect with other people or just read under a tree. It's wonderful.
Yep. So what's your book about? You wrote a book on poetry. Do you have
Yeah.
a copy to show?
Do I have it? Excuse me?
Copy to show
Oh, yes, I do.
our audience?
It's a beautiful cover from published by Shanti Arts in Brunswick, Maine. They did a wonderful job. So it's called Breathing Lessons. And there is a lot of breath in the book. I tend to forget to mention that. It's kind of obvious. Breath as literally and as metaphor for taking in life, for being more present. But there's also a lot of breathing of trees and things that breathe in other ways. And I just had a book launch a couple weeks ago at LARAC in Glens Falls. That's Lower Adirondack Regional Arts Center. And it is available there and a few other places, and hopefully soon at the Northshire, and also online through the publisher, as well as Amazon and Goodreads and bookshop.org. And we'll be doing a few more readings around the area in the coming weeks and months as well.
How many books have you written on poetry?
Or books of poetry. This is my first full-length book. I did have a chapbook many years ago and, individual poems published out and about, but this is my first full-length book. So it's kind of a milestone for me. I've been writing a long time and putting this together the last few years. So it does feel like people say, a birthing, sending it out into the world and seeing where it wants to go and who it wants to connect with, which has been really fun. And seeing, like yourself, it's so cool to see, wow, this person heard about it, and they don't, they live a ways away from me, or emails you get from somebody who read a poem that meant something to them or spoke to them in some way. That's really wonderful.
Mhm. So, can you read us one of your poems?
Sure. Let's see which one to read. I know I sent you a few.
Have you done a poem about the beauty of the Adirondacks or Lake George or Saratoga, Glens Falls, that whole area?
Yeah. Some of them, yeah, are actually specific place names, a couple of the Hudson River, but maybe I'll read one called Returning to Earth, which I wrote several years ago in Saratoga after walking in the woods in one of the preserves there, but thinking about a few different things and places. And it was a time when I was reading a lot of Neruda and kind of rediscovering Pablo Neruda, and who's just an amazing poet. So he's in here. Returning to Earth. It happened on a day I went to the woods, a day I wore my blue scarf, savored an almond muffin and shade-grown coffee. A day when I thought about my conversation with Tay at the cafe. Images of rocks and roots burst forth, and then a bird in flight. It happened on the day I finished my taxes. It happened between one thing and another. A poem about the soul, a book about things, shoes and metal, tobacco smoke and salt. Many things conspired to tell me the whole story, wrote Neruda. Not only those things that leap and climb, desire and survive. A day teeming with things, the rust orange on the chimes, the mailbox is blue, my books, fibrous threads, the stone tablets in the park, the way they sing, the way they stay still. Now it seems I can't say enough about things, how they connect me to a string in my body that binds me to my soul, how every feeling now is a stone or a book, tobacco smoke or salt.
Thank you.
So
Thank
you're welcome.
you. So, tell us again where they could purchase your book.
Unless they're in the Glens Falls area right now, or Middlebury, Vermont, where it's also in a bookshop, the Vermont bookshop on Main Street in Middlebury, or at Larac in Glens Falls, or also it's at Rock Hill Bread. They have a little book area in Glens Falls. Other than that, the publisher, Shanti Arts, online, or Goodreads, Amazon, bookshop.org, which is a new place, which is wonderful. And so any of those places, and I'm hoping to get it into a couple bookshops in Albany as well.
Okay.
So, and maybe some others in the North Shire. So got a list of places I have to work on, or where my publisher might be connecting with.
That's terrific. So you've been listening to Susan Jeffs. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Local Everywhere. And if you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. And more importantly, I just created a new website called Digital Cynthia, and I have all of my YouTube videos on there. So if you want to see the other works that I've done, in addition to Susan, they're all up there. So Susan, thank you so much for taking the time
Thank you.
to be on Local Everywhere. And Have a
It was
great day,
a
everybody.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah.